looks can be deceiving. It's possible that the numbers that we're looking at, which seem to tell a story or at least a trend, might not tell the story as we see it. Maybe there's something underneath. Maybe there's something else to look at, because the story that we see right now in this presidential election is that Kamala Harris may have peaking about a month too early. We see Donald Trump trending. Is he trending too early? And do these numbers tell an accurate story? When taking a look at Neapolitan News Service, 45% think Harris will win, 42% think Trump will win. That's think. What do we know? Tony Katz today. Good to be with you. Scott Rassmussen joins us right now. The founder of Rassmussen Reports, not with what they do right now. And you can see more of him. I think this is him at Neapolitan News Service, NeapolitanInstitute.org. Let's talk about the numbers, Scott, and I appreciate you taking the time. Let's start with my generalized theory. Kamala Harris peaked too early. Donald Trump is trending upward in this presidential election. Am I right or am I wrong?
If you're saying that without huge increments, boy, I'm getting a lot of echo on this, so I hope we can fix that. But in terms of your general comment, I agree. There was a slight bounce for Kamala Harris when she became the nominee. It faded quickly. And now she's at a point where Donald Trump is gaining a little bit of ground. But, this is still a race that's very, very close. The Senate is looking good for Republicans. House is too close to call, might be leaning a little bit in the D direction. And the White House, we still don't know who's going to win. This week, I'd rather be in Trump's position than Harris's, but there's a few more weeks to go.
There always is a few more weeks to go, and you certainly sound good on our end. If you have an echo, we can do what we can to reconnect. But, you talk about these three things, and people always seem to forget that there are Senate races and there are House races. So let's go into what you discussed. What are you seeing that makes you think that the House could fall into Democrat hands?
First off, when I look at the races that are close in the House, there's not a whole lot of them. And, when you start off with that, the number of races we feel confident about show pretty much an even split. A couple of the key races that are in the House that we're not sure how they're going to turn out are in states without a major presidential campaign or a Senate campaign, places like New York and California. And without those larger campaigns, without the campaigns at the top of the ticket, Republicans may struggle a bit there. Now, I could make the argument in New York that the scandals involving the mayor might be helpful in suburban races. There may be other issues involved. But if you really look at where the races are, you maybe say it's a 60-40% chance, 60%, 40% chance the Democrats win the House. But obviously, some of these races we don't have good polling on right now, so you're guessing a little bit.
Talking to Scott Rassmussen right now, of course, the man who originally brought us Rassmussen Reports. This is the very idea of coattails. And so when we look at some of these places, if there is no presidential race, there are no coattails to help some of these Republicans along. Is that to then say that without constant media attention, people, are they just voting in a different direction, or are they just complacent and not showing up to the polls at all?
Look, there's two different races that go on. There's the races in the competitive states and the races in the rest of the country. I think in the Montana Senate race, the two campaigns have spent about $27 per registered voter in the state, or some outrageous number like that. That's a whole different campaign than when you're in a state without much going on. And so So part of that is just the attention. And look, if you're running a presidential campaign right now, you're going to be focused, to be blunt, not on Indiana. You're going to be focused on Michigan or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, because that's where you've got to put your resources. Those are likely to be the decisive states. And the same thing applies in a couple of those states or in all three of those blue wall states, to Senate races that are going on.
Yeah, well, look, in my beloved Indiana, we get it, right? We're not a state that people are focused on. But in Oklahoma, Tennessee, certainly in Michigan, there's a little, certainly in those other states, a little more play. In Michigan, there's a lot more play. Talking to Scott Rassmussen right now. But that was the House. In the Senate, you feel like Republicans can take this. Now, there was a feel that they could take, it could end up being like a 56 seat win or victory for the Republicans. I don't think they feel that way anymore. Where do you see their opportunities?
So right now the Republicans have 49 seats, and I don't believe they will lose any of their incumbents. There was some concern about Ted Cruz in Texas, but he appears to be stabilizing with a modest lead. So they start with 49 seats, almost certain to pick up Joe Manchin's seat in West Virginia. That gets the Republicans to 50. If Donald Trump is president, 50 seats is enough for them to control the Senate. If Harris wins the White House, they would need one more seat. It looks like in Montana, we're likely to see Tim Sheehy beat John Tester. This is very much evidence of political gravity. Donald Trump is going to win the state by nearly 20 points and probably pull Sheehy across with him. That would get them to 51 seats. The next most likely to flip, in my estimate, is Ohio. Our latest polling shows Moreno up by 2 points, but it really depends on how big Trump's victory is in the state. Our last poll showed him winning Ohio by 11 points. A couple of other polls are out showing Trump winning by 6 to 8 points and Moreno doing a few points worse. If Moreno wins there, you're now at 52 seats for the Republicans, and I think that would be considered a very good night for the GOP. I do know that some insiders believe they have a shot at picking up at least one of the three blue wall states in terms of a Senate race, so maybe you get a little higher. But right now we're probably looking at that 51, 52 seat margin.
Right, and in those blue wall states, we were talking about McCormick beating Bob Casey in Pennsylvania. Is that possible? You have Rogers and the possibility of a win there against the Democratic Congresswoman. I forget her name, Slotnick. That's you're right. And then in Wisconsin, can Eric Hovde actually beat Tammy Baldwin? And we're hearing that she is trending downward as well. But going back to the presidential side here, my argument is that Kamala Harris peaked too early. That's why they put her out to do all these kinds of interviews, and those interviews have not worked. They have not been successful. As a matter of fact, they have prevented what the campaign has been desperate to do, which is try and separate Harris and Biden, make her own woman, and make her this change candidate. Is this? I don't think I'm wrong in saying this was the plan. Certainly, I'd love your thoughts on what your take is on that Democratic strategy. But if you're the Democrats looking at the next 3.5 weeks, how do you make this up?
Well, the first thing I believe is that the fact that she's doing these interviews tells me that they are convinced she's either slipping behind or at risk of slipping behind. I mean, the fantasy strategy for the Democrats would have been to make this entirely a referendum on Donald Trump, in the belief that most people would prefer somebody other than Donald Trump as president. The minute it becomes a choice, that strategy begins to fall apart. Kamala Harris, the more she is in the news, the more she makes it a choice. And, some of the things she's saying are causing problems. There may be, and I want to be really clear about this, in a close race, when you see things shifting by 1 or 2 points at a time, and you look to understand why, sometimes you see mirages, sometimes you see statistical noise, but it does appear to me that there is a decline in enthusiasm for Harris among younger Democratic voters, and there may be other slivers of the population that were committed to voting against Donald Trump and no longer sure if they want to do that or if they even want to show up and vote.
The other question of mine is to see if I'm right? I'm trying to see if my political acumen is as good as I think it is, which is this is an election about men. Very often we discuss elections as women coming out, suburban women coming out, suburban white women coming out, and this has been a conversation that has been legitimate over the years. In this one, this seems to be about men. This seems to be about Hispanic men. This seems to be about black men. This seems about whether white men will actually, as I say it, suburban white men will listen to their wives, or they're going to vote for Donald Trump because there's just no way they're bringing themselves to vote for Kamala Harris, which is the opposite of how most people think it on the left, that it's somehow the husbands who determine what their wives vote for. Is this, in your view, an election about men?
Every election that we hear about the gender gap only talks about half of it. Donald Trump has trouble with women voters, we hear. Well, Republicans have always struggled with women voters. But the flip side of that is every election the Democrats are having some trouble with male voters. It's just not talked about in that way. It's also important to recognize that neither of these groups are, universally in agreement. Married women tend to be more Republican than single women. There's all kinds of other subsets. If I were trying to tell you the group that I'm looking at, though, the most, and I'll back up and give you the reason why, Pennsylvania is the single most important state in this election. I have no doubt that rural voters are going to show up strongly to vote for Donald Trump. I believe the suburban voters in the collar counties around Philadelphia will be a little more receptive to Trump than they were in earlier times.
Oh, my.
The real key is going to be black voters in Philadelphia. How much of a turnout will there be? I think if we see that turnout being somewhat below normal, which could very well happen, then Trump would have a very good chance of winning Pennsylvania. And if he wins Pennsylvania, he gets to move back into the White House.
Scott Rassmussen, you can find him there on the Twitter X at Scott W. Rassmussen, and you can head over, because he has it linked, Napolitan News, napolitannews.org. Scott, I always appreciate you taking the time. Hope to catch you one more time before the election. Scott Rassmussen, thank you. More is coming up. I'm Tony Katz.